Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Blue Coat in Liverpool for our celebration of public transport policy. This is Bus Regulation, the musical. Hold on to your seats. Over the next 30 minutes, you'll be taken on a whistle-stop tour of more than 50 years of history. We'll see how key political decisions have affected the quality of our public transport and how the quality of our public transport ultimately affects the quality of all our lives. Please welcome your host for this afternoon, Betty, the long-suffering bus passenger.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming along today. I'm Betty and I've been travelling around Merseyside since the 1950s. And you won't believe the change I've seen since then, honest to God. We used to have an amazing variety of public transport in our region. Ferries and trains, of course, but also trolley buses and talents. An overhead railway with a spectacular view linking Seaforth to Dingle across the docks. And then at the centre of it all was our world-class tram network, covering all corners of the city and reaching out as far as Aintree, Kirkby, Prescot and Garston. But some misguided politicians decided to rip all that up. They thought cars and roads were the future, but I always knew that was a mistake, you know. In the absence of our beautiful trams, it was buses that stepped up to fill the gaps. Please welcome to the floor, everyone, Merseyside's buses! In the 1960s, most buses in our towns and cities were run by municipal bus companies, owned by local authorities or corporations as they were called back then. The biggest was Liverpool Corporation Transport, with more than 1,000 buses reaching out as far as Knowsley and Sefton. Then there was St Helens and Southport. And over the Wirral, we had Birkenhead and Wallasey. The buses in more rural areas were owned by old private companies. In the north, we had Ribble of Preston, and in the south, we had Crossville of Chester. Each bus company had its own patch, each with routes, timetables and fares. It was a system that worked well when most people lived and worked locally. But after the Second World War, all over Britain, there had been a policy of deliberate urban sprawl. Lots of our inner city housing was demolished and thousands of us were moved out to new estates on the outskirts, like Kirkby, Canny Farm, Huyton and Speke. And some were moved even further away to new towns in Skem and Runcorn. But all that just meant was more travelling for us lot, with thousands of us now having to commute in and out of the city every single day. Merseyside had become a sprawling conurbation and we needed a public transport network to match. That meant planning and coordination transport across the whole of the region, to provide a joined-up service that everyone could get around easily without needing to own a car. Labour's 1968 Transport Act aimed to deliver this. First, it created the National Bus Company, bringing together our rural bus companies like Crossville and Ribble into public ownership, so they could cooperate rather than compete. And then, for our big metropolitan areas, the Transport Act created the power to set up passenger transport executives, whose task it would be to provide a properly integrated and efficient system of public passenger transport to meet the needs of each area. Our new designated area of Merseyside would cover some 230 miles, home to nearly 1.5 million people, and would bring together Liverpool with Birkenhead and Wallasey. On 1st December 1969, the Merseyside Passenger Transport Executive was formed, or MPTE for short. It inherited all of Liverpool Corporation buses, which became its North and South divisions, as well as Birkenheads and Wallaceys, which became its Wirral division. Each now proudly displayed the new Catherine Wheel logo. MPTE's aim was to unite our region across the Mersey by expanding and improving public transport connections and coordinating and integrating routes, timetables and fares. It launched a new Cross River Express bus service linking Wallasey to Liverpool when the new Kingsway Tunnel opened in 1971. Then it began collaborating with British Rail. Our region's rail network was renamed Merseyrail, and work began on ambitious plans to transform it into an electric underground system, with new tunnels under the city to loop and link our existing train lines and stations. MPTA could now plan and coordinate bus routes to feed into and complement the railways rather than compete. It also had a duty to cooperate with the National Bus Company. And so PTE made an agreement with Crossville and Ribble, so that all their services in Merseyside were run to PTE's timetables and fares. This made it possible to launch a new traveller ticket, the first ticket of its kind in our country, offering unlimited travel on buses, trains and ferries throughout the PTE's entire area for just $1.95 a week. It was just so easy for us bus passengers. I loved it, it was boss. But I wanted St Helens and Southport to join in the fun. What we needed was a new regional council to bring everybody together. Then in 1974, the Merseyside County Council was established. It brought together the region's 5 local authorities who now had a statutory duty to provide a coordinated and efficient system of public passenger transport to meet the needs of our county. Our new council took control of PTA and renamed it Merseyside Transport. St Helens and Southport's bus operations were finally added to the fleet. And all 1,600 buses were united with a beautiful coat of Verona green. Now public transport could be coordinated seamlessly across the whole of Merseyside, with new interchanges opening at Kirkby and Waterloo, making it easier to hop from the train to the bus. And after the new Loop and Link rail lines were opened in 1977, Merseyside finally had a real metropolitan transport network. Now we needed to get a new plan just to get everyone using it. The early 80s were an exciting time for us bus passengers, you know. Merseyside Transport decided to reintroduce a bit of local variety. given colour-coded logos to each of its 5 divisions. North, South, Wirral, Southport and St Helens. Don't they look gorgeous? But the fun really started when Labour took control of the County Council in 1981. With their new cheap fares policy inspired by what they'd been doing in South Yorkshire. The aim was to get people out on the bus to revitalise our shopping centres, to help the unemployed and to combat the sense of isolation felt by people living on the outskirts. They introduced save-away tickets, a new daily travel card to give you cheap travel all day long by bus, train and ferry. And they cut fares by 10% every October for the next 4 years. Love it. Offering 2p flat fares for kids and free travel for the unemployed. They ran special 10p Go Anywhere days every summer, where you could get on the beach in Southport or over to the Wirral for just 10p. So exciting I can't even say it. That's about 30p in today's money. Bus passenger numbers soared. Everyone was happy. Finally, Merseyside had a public transport network we could all be proud of. But sadly, it wasn't gonna last.
The Conservatives saw people who travelled by bus as failures in life. They were opposed to the public ownership and control of all services and infrastructure. They saw no benefits in coordination and integration, and they saw great dangers in public subsidy. Their aim was to centralise power in Westminster, so they abolished the Merseyside County Council in 1986. Their vision for public transport wouldn't require any strategic planning anyway. They thought the invisible hand of the market could do that work. Their 1985 Transport Act would deregulate bus operations everywhere in Britain except London. Their aim was to shake up public transport by injecting some competition. In preparation for deregulation, the National Bus Company was restructured and rebranded. Ribble services in Merseyside were split off to form a new company called North Western, based in Bootle. And Crossville was also split in two, with its Merseyside operations getting a new Leaping Links logo. They both had bright new liveries in the hope of attracting new business. The Transport Act demanded that all Britain's publicly owned bus operators were transferred into arm's-length public companies. So in 1986, Merseyside Transport became Merseyside Transport Limited, trading as Mersey-Bus. Its public subsidy was removed. It closed several of its garages and made many staff redundant. Now, it was gonna have to fight to survive.
On the 28th of October was known as D-Day, when deregulation came into full effect. Mersey-Bus, North Western and Crossville all went head-to-head, piling buses in the city centre to make the most of lucrative routes. Now, anyone could start a bus company and run routes wherever they thought they could make the most money. So there were loads of newcomers like Fairway of Kirkby, Liver Line of Bootle and Liver Bus of Huyton. They were all companies started by drivers that were made redundant by Merseybus. They were joined by some old coach companies too, like CMT of the Wirral, who'd been given a new lease of life by deregulation. Dirty tactics were rife, where operators blocking bus stops or running just in front of others to pick passengers up first. Many unprofitable routes were caught and fares shot up, with some more than doubling. Routes, timetables and tickets were changing so often it was almost impossible for us lot to keep up. The result was chaos. Intrigation had become disintrigation. So the Tories took the chance to push through their plans for privatisation. The old NBC companies were the first for the chop. North Western was sold to Draw Lane, a company from Salisbury seen as one of the initial success stories of deregulation. A year later, Crossville was also bought by Draw Lane, with half its services being absorbed into North Western, and its Chester and Wirral services being sold to Potteries Motor Traction of Stoke. Known as PMT for short. Mergers and takeovers were about to become the new normal. If you thought the 80s were chaos, things were about to go from bad to worse. We now had a transport authority called Merseytravel, but it wasn't much of an authority anymore as it could no longer plan and coordinate bus services to meet our community's needs. Instead, Merseyside had become one of the most hotly contested bus markets in the UK, with more than 58 bus companies now fighting for the business on our streets. They all had their own routes, timetables and tickets. So it was just so confusing for anyone trying to catch a bus. No wonder a third of bus passengers had just given up. Many forced to buy cars they couldn't afford. Merseybus was really struggling, so it had to reinvent itself to survive. It introduced a new Crimson Lake livery and set up a low-cost brand called Merseyrider to take on their competition. Merseyrider was just the same as Merseybus, except it paid its drivers less. These desperate tactics meant the writing was on the wall. And in 1993, after more than 80 years and public ownership, all Merseybus's operations were sold to its management and employees for just £1, becoming MTL Trust Holdings Limited, or MTL for short. In a deregulated market, it was grow or die. So MTL expanded beyond Merseyside, running buses across Lancashire, Manchester, and also down in that London. They even took over train services on Merseyrail and Northern after rail privatisation. Then MTL started picking off the local competition. First, they bought up Fairway, but North Western wanted in on the action too. They bought up Liver Line, becoming part of Draw Lane's growing empire, which had since been renamed British Bus PLC just because they owned so many bus companies. It was no surprise when MTL's Merseyrider operation was shut down after its workers went on strike. So they decided to introduce some local brands to take on the remaining competition. Lancashire Travel Southport and District and Wirral Peninsula were all part of MTL's growing empire, which took over Little Liverbus as well. But all this competition was exhausting for everybody involved. So in 1995, MTL, Northwestern, CMT and others decided to make an agreement not to encroach on each other's routes and to fix their fares. They could relax for a minute, but they didn't know that cooperation was outlawed by this new free market regime. The Monopolies and Mergers Commission declared their agreement illegal and fined all the companies involved. So then takeovers resumed. Over the Wirral, PMT was bought up by First of Aberdeen, which was by far becoming the UK's biggest bus company. And in 1996, Northwestern's owners, British Bus PLC, were bought by the Cowie Group of Sunderland, becoming the UK's second largest bus company, with all its operations rebranded Arriva. Slick corporate identities now seemed the way to go. So in 1998, MTL rebranded all operations in the north of England as MTL North. It might have looked a bit smarter, but it was still headed for trouble. I remember back in '85 when the Tories had claimed that deregulation would bring lower fares, new services and more passengers by increasing competition. But the opposite had been proven true. Surprise, surprise. Fares had almost tripled and we'd lost many vital routes. And passenger numbers were in steep decline. The system was pushing people into poverty and it was a disaster for our climate. There were now just a few big bus companies left running most of our buses. MTL North was still struggling. It had overstretched itself at trying to run 2 rail franchises as well as buses all over the country. It was becoming financially unstable. Arriva saw this as an opportunity to pounce and get itself a near monopoly on all the public transport in Merseyside. So in February 2000, it made an offer to take on all MTL's rail and buses. The sale was about to go through, but the Competition Commission intervened. They demanded that a third of MTL Merseyside's operations be sold off as a separate company, which was bought by 2 former MTL managers who named it Glenvale Transport Limited, or GTL for short. To stand any chance against Arriva, GTL had to grow. So it bought out CMT to become the second biggest operator in Merseyside. But its success was short-lived. In 2005, the UK's third biggest bus company, Stagecoach of Perth, swooped in and took over all of GTL. Now, the ownership and control of our buses had never been further from our hands. By now, it was clear that the big bus businesses had ruled the show. Arriva, Stagey and First were all multinational companies listed on the stock exchange with one priority: making profit for their shareholders. And in 2010, Arriva's main shareholder became the German government when its state-owned rail company Deutsche Bahn for €1.8 billion. And first sold up to its arch rivals, Stagey, leaving just two big companies holding us all to ransom. They continued to crank up the fares and cut all routes that they didn't deem commercially viable, whilst also receiving millions of pounds in public subsidy directly from the government. The situation was mad. 30 years of deregulation had been a race to the bottom. And from my experience as a long-suffering bus passenger, it was obvious what needed to be done. We needed a new regional authority like our old county council, which could stand up for our communities and ensure that we all got the reliable and affordable bus services that we needed. Then in 2014, the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority was established, reuniting the old Merseyside county together with Halton. And it took control of our transport authority, Merseytravel, with our new Metro Mayor being given new powers to regulate the buses. The question is whether these powers will be put to good use. Last year, the Combined Authority released its plans to re-regulate all buses in Liverpool City Region as part of a new, fully integrated public transport network designed to serve our community's needs. Where our buses, trains and ferries are once again planned and coordinated to work together seamlessly as a whole. So that no matter where you live in our region, you can get around easily without needing a car. We can have regular and reliable bus services at all times of day, night and weekends. And we can finally roll out our tap and go ticket so that you can hop from the bus to the train to the ferry. Confident that you'll only have to pay up to a fair daily price cap. Something that London has had since 2003. Deregulation has left the rest of Britain decades behind. Now it's finally time to catch up. Let's get behind these plans and make sure our combined authority finally delivers a public transport network we can all be proud of again.
Thank you for watching Bus Regulation the Musical, created by me, Ellie Harrison, in collaboration with the Better Buses for Merseyside campaign, featuring music by Andrew Lloyd Webber, and starring Betty Beehive as the bus passenger, with skaters from Liverpool Rollerbirds, Amelia Boner, Faye Waring, Christine Higgins, Hannah Dickman, Shelley Salmon, Elle Jackson, Ellis Hogarth, Kate Rowlinson, and from Wirral Roller Derby, Rebecca Farmer and Gemma Rigby. Our stagehands were Emily Furno, Ellie Harrison, Poppy Hughes and Eva Donald. It was produced by Emily Furno and supported by the Arts Council England, Blue Coat, We Own It and Acorn Liverpool. If you do one thing when you leave today, please join the Better Buses for Merseyside campaign and let's fight for the world-class public transport network we deserve.